Hi, and welcome to the craft table. I am Renee, and in this video, I am going to demonstrate how to make a signature quilt block. The craft table is turning 2. So this tutorial is going to go over the specific signature block that I have requested from my friends for our community quilt. But if you want to read about more signature quilts and how you can use signature blocks in a quilt, in the description of this video, I have a link to a blog post where I show some of the other blocks that I've made and quilts that I've made with signature blocks. So whether you're here to find out how to make a signature block for the craft table, and if you are, thank you very much, or whether you're just here to find out how to make a signature block for another project, I hope you find this tutorial helpful. And please like and subscribe to our YouTube channel. So let's get started. To make a signature block like the one I'm requesting for the craft table, all you really need is one white square of fabric that is 4.5 inches and 2 contrasting bright colored fabric squares that are 3.5 inches of the same fabric. And then a pencil, a ultra fine Sharpie pen, or a micron Pigma pen for actually signing your name on the signature block. And if you'd like, a freezer paper. The smallest sheet of freezer paper helps to stabilize the fabric when you're actually writing on your signature block. Of course, you want a sewing machine, a ruler, a rotary cutter, iron, your basic sewing supplies. This method that I'm going to show you, you will end up with a block, which is a signature block where you will write your name, depending on what it's for. I like to ask people to put their name, maybe their Instagram handle, if that's where I know them, and then their location. So you'll end up with a signature block, and you will also end up with 2 half square triangles. So that's like a bonus. And if you're making a bunch of blocks, these extra half square triangles really come in handy for making either other projects or for making a border for accents within your quilt. So on the wrong side of your half square triangles, you're going to draw a diagonal line with your pencil on the wrong side of the fabric from corner to corner in just one line. Now, if you're working with directional fabric in your 3.5 inch square blocks and you care about which direction they go, then when you are drawing your diagonal lines, you want to make sure they are going in the same direction. So basically you're going to stitch a square on either side of the bigger square. So if you don't want your fabrics going like this, and you want them to go in the same direction, then just make sure that your diagonal lines are also going in the same direction. Now you can see that these squares overlap, so you want to stitch one square at a time. So what you're going to do, you're going to go to your sewing machine and you're going to place right sides together, your 3.5 inch square on top of your 4.5 inch square. You want to make sure that your diagonal line is going in the correct direction, which is this way. Basically, you're going to be stitching on the line, flipping the square over, and trimming it. Same thing here. So even though you're not going to sew these at the same time, this is how you want your blocks to go onto your background fabric. That way, when you stitch this line and flip it over, this line and flip it over, your block is accurate. If you happen to do it like this, then you're not going to get a signature block. Ask me how I know that. So this is one that I've already stitched. Again, you can see I've got my line going this way and my line going this way. I stitched them right on the line. And I've got my directional fabric going in the same direction. Now, when you're stitching on the line, and pretend like this is your sewing machine and you're feeding it through, you want to stitch just inside that line, just like one thread over. That way, when you fold it over, when you trim it and you fold it over, it will line up. If you stitch it right on the line and you accidentally go over just a little bit, then your block is going to be just a tad short. This is what it looks like after you've sewn the two squares on opposite corners of the background square. And what you could do is go ahead and take your ruler and your rotary cutter and trim off this excess back here. So you take your ruler, line up the 1/4 inch mark on your stitched line, trim off that excess, and then press the square over. Or what you could do is, before trimming off that excess, draw another line a 1/2 inch away from your stitched line. Stitch on that line like you did with this line. I'll show you, I've done that on this block over here. You can see that I've stitched on that second line. And in this case, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my ruler again, I'm going to put it to where I'm going to trim a 1/4 inch away from that first stitch seam. And you'll notice that will also give me a 1/4 inch seam on this other stitch line. So basically I'm cutting in between the two stitch lines. And so again, I'm going to press, use my iron, it's a little bit neater. So I'm going to press those two squares out, and then that will give me my 4.5 inch signature block. But whereas the first time when I just cut off the excess without having that second stitch line, I just have 2 triangles. And I could go back and stitch on there and get a 1/2 square triangle. But in this case, with the extra, stitching that extra line, I now have a perfect 1/2 square triangle already stitched. And actually, I would have 2 if I did it on both sides. So it's just a little tip I learned when I was doing a signature block swap years ago. And that swap was where you swap signature blocks with 99 other quilt bloggers. And so you make 100 blocks and you end up with 100 blocks from people all over the world. But when you're doing that many, taking that one extra little step to stitch the 2 lines on either side really adds up in a big way with all the bonus 1/2 square triangles that you get. So I hope that makes sense. I talk about it a little bit more in the blog post, and I have the measurements there as well. But once you have your block all finished, and if you need to, sometimes you might have to trim it just a little bit. to make sure it's at the 4.5 inch, lining it up with the background square. And having a freezer paper ironed onto the back, shiny side down. Just makes it easier to write without the paper shifting. You could also use sandpaper if you have that. And like if you do English paper piecing, you probably have a little sandpaper board. When you write your name, or if you're asking people, if you're collecting blocks for a quilt project, you want to make sure people don't write all the way into the corners, because you do need to leave a little bit of room for seam allowance. That you can see with the freezer paper, it's quite easy. To just write your name. You might want to go a little bit slower than you would if you were writing it on a sheet of paper, but it's really not that difficult. And then I usually put my personal Instagram, which is Renee Creates. And then Orlando, Florida. If this was an international swap, or if it was going to a person where I was making a quilt block in a bee, for example, and it was going to Canada or Australia, somewhere outside the United States, then I would add the USA. And that's all there is to it. So this is an example of the signature blocks that I am requesting for the craft table's 2nd anniversary birthday celebration. So if you're making one for that, thank you very much. I will have the address in the description attached to this video of where you can send the block. And if you're here just to find out how to make a signature block, I wish you the best on your project. I would love to hear what it is that you've done with these blocks. So please leave a comment or tag us on social media. Thanks so much for watching this video, and happy stitching.